Hi, everyone. Welcome to our monthly webinar series for the NICAR Commercial Global Business Network. My name's Teresa Mueller. I am acting chair and vice chair as a med. And we have been hosting this since we started with the pandemic, where we highlight different countries throughout the world, bringing on commercial practitioners to talk about hot topics and give information about their country. And the topics could be ranging anywhere from crypto to sustainability, capital markets, etc. So we bop around the globe highlighting, this month it's South Africa. In the past, we've had Japan, we've had Canada, we've had Mexico, we've had a Latin American developer, India. So we're always welcome to bringing on new faces, new topics every month. But as a side note, next month we are having for the National Association of Realtors the C5 conference in New York City. So we're looking to do a live event there as opposed to a Zoom network. We understand that people can be Zoomed out, but in this format, it of course makes sense because we're connecting with everyone across the globe. So hopefully I will see some of you in C5 New York City in mid-August. That would be super. I know, of course, we have Expo Real around the corner in October, National Association of Realtors in November. We will have some seminars over the fall months, and always looking forward to feedback. So this session is recorded. What we ask during this session is that everyone, except for those who are presenting or the main panelists, to not be on video or your voice on. So if it accidentally does go on, our help Lauren will be muting and taking you off video if that accidentally does happen while we're on the presentation. But all of our panelists will stay on video and recording. In terms of the format, soon Ahmed will be coming on. He will be introducing some of our peers from NICAR as well as the panelists. They will give each a presentation, and then after we will have question answer session. Feel free to write the questions, but highlight it in the either the chat or the Q&A session. I also encourage everyone at any time to give all your contact information in the chat, and then you can then later download it for your records. But we will have, after we wrap up the Q&A session, we will have a networking session where we ask everyone to introduce themselves and to give a commercial need and want. And even if you didn't have a specific need or want that makes sense from, a buy, lease, sale, etc., in a commercial property, it could be, hey, I'm just here to learn more about commercial topics and or network. So thank you everyone for coming on today. And I would like to next introduce Ahmed, who is a real estate superstar. He was global ambassador for last year, and he does an amazing job of always connecting everyone, not only locally, regionally, and nationally in the real estate business. So thank you very much, Ahmed. Without further ado, if you could please take over.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you very much. Very fortunate to have two of the best today. John Lewis, he is one of the finest economists in Africa, probably he's recognized worldwide. And Louis Talia, attorney, appraiser, university lecturer. So we have two excellent resources to give us exactly what's going on in the South African commercial real estate market. Before I do that, I'd like to introduce and thank my friends from Rebosa who have made this connection, Adrian Dutoit and Ronald Bowman. Ronald was the one who reached out to both to John and to Louis. And thank you for your great cooperation. Even when we did the program on the CIPS course on Africa, they were right up in the forefront, and John gave us a permission to use his last economic forecast. This is done through NICAR and with partnership with NASBAR and Main Street. So there's three great organizations involved here. I see Mr. Lesky looking at me. and he's one of our great partners that we're working along with. I'd like to introduce Alina Aby. Alina is the Global Coordinator for Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa. She's got her hands full, but she's doing a great job. 3 of these countries in Africa fall under Alina, and so we're fortunate enough she was free today to join us. Alina brings a lot of experience to the global team. She is based in California, in San Francisco, but has roots starting off in Europe, proficient in English, Romanian, French, Italian, and Spanish. And if she spends enough time in South Africa, she'll probably speak Afrikaans and Zulu. So Alina also is the chair of FIOPS in San Francisco Council, past VP of Marketing and Networking Committee of FIOPSI. Has a PhD in economics. And Alina, go ahead, tell us all about you. And don't forget to tell us also your project that you were involved with this year in Eastern Europe.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here and for the warm introduction, Ahmed. I've been very fortunate to be working with you for the past 2 years. As he mentioned, our region at NICAR Global, we thrive to be a world connector between real estate professionals, and we've been doing this for more than 30 years. We're probably the first national domestic real estate, organized real estate organization to do it, to reach out to different organizations and different countries in the world. And now we have over 100 partners, bilateral partners all around the world. So our region, as Ahmed mentions, is Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And that means 21 countries and 25 bilateral partners. So it's pretty much everything from Central East Europe and in Middle East, we have Turkey, Lebanon, and UAE. And in Africa, we are fortunate to have partners in South Africa. We have 2 wonderful partners, and Ghana, and our newest bilateral partner in Africa is Nigeria. So we hope that we'll grow more and we'll find more similar bilateral partners in Africa that we can exchange educational real estate practice in residential, commercial, ethics, and of course a business, because we also thrive to be a enabler and business platform for our members in both countries with our bilateral partner. So aside of that, I'm very proud to say that our region has been extremely involved in finding housing for refugees in Ukraine. This has been and it is an ongoing project. We're still working on it, but we felt responsible as a global real estate leader to unify our partners and find solutions for Ukrainian refugees in housing, because this is what we do. In times of peace or war, we take care of housing. And we hope that we'll find a permanent solution, not just for Ukraine, but for other crises to come, and have a global relief foundation or fund that can help to future crises to come. So this is our program. I'm very happy to be here, and I am very excited to hear your presentations and a lot more details about South African market, real estate market.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you very much. I'm going to start off with introducing John Lewis. But before I do that, I see Mr. Bill Caton. Bill? So Bill Caton is one of our leading commercial practitioners in the area, but he's the founder of the CGBN, the Commercial Global Business Network of the Northern Illinois Commercial Association of Realtors. A little wave there, Bill. Thank you. So the bios are posted on the website when you registered on the NICAR website. So there's a lot to talk about for each one of these presenters. But I'll just give you a little highlight of John. He started his career as an economist in the National Treasury in South Africa. He was part of the team that implemented the country's first medium-term expenditure framework in the early days of Minister Trevor Manuel's tenure as finance minister. So, you know, he brings a lot great experience in the government sector and in the private sector. And so he's now with he was with the APSA group for 5 years, where he was economist coordinating the group's macroeconomic forecasting process. In 2004, he earned Reuters Economist of the Year. Congratulations, John. He has a passion, everything to do with what's going on is related to the consumer and the property cycle. Just want to tell you a little bit about his private passion. He's a sports junkie. And I'm reading here, he's participated in the ultra triathlon, including the ultra unsupported cycling. I don't know what that means. And also a marathon runner at the Comrades Marathon, which is really a grueling, you know, if you I lived in South Africa and I know about that. And he's a Manchester United fan. So if he looks at enough American sports, we can turn him into a Chicago Bears fan. I'm not sure you're going to be into the American football scene. Pleasure to have you here, John, and it's all yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Ahmed. Right, I thought long and hard about what I could tell you all in about 12 minutes about South Africa. I thought, let me speak without slides, because as soon as I speak with slides, I speak for hours. So what I'll just try and do is cover the key themes in property at the moment in the South African property market. That's probably the best I can do in a short space of time. And when you're reading, you know, if you're reading any news or Googling about South African property markets, hopefully you'll just recall these themes as you look at the opportunities in this part of the world. I still think South Africa is the best economy on the African continent. It's the most developed, it's the most diversified into services, so therefore probably one of the most stable. But it's been going through a tough patch in recent times. A lot of it our own doing. It's we haven't had the best of economic policy. And at the moment, economic policy and politics, as we move towards the next big political change, I think is key to the fortunes of the overall property market. So I think it's important. You know, I think politics in this part of the world at the moment is far more important than in, say, the US, for instance, where, you know, if the Democrats lose the houses this year, the Republicans will take over and business carries on largely as normal. It's not that simple in this part of the world. So I think when we look at the property super cycle, and when we look at the great buying opportunity for property overall, the last big great buying opportunity, I think, was in the late 1990s, when interest rates were sky high because of sort of a hangover from high inflation in the 1980s and weak economic growth in the 1980s as we moved towards the previous big political change in a turbulent way. And real property values in the sort of late 90s were rock bottom. So that was the last great buying opportunity. We went into a stage where the boycotts and sanctions on this country ended in the early 1990s. Interest rates came down to much more realistic levels than the 25.5% prime rate peak in 1998. And we could also, when we got into trouble in the global financial crisis, we could even run bigger government deficits for a while and crank up the government debt. So we had a relative boom time and even a housing bubble incorporated in that prior to the global financial crisis of 2008. But by that stage, we'd cranked up the debt, consumer debt, the household debt. Business debt is relatively high, and more recently, government debt is also relatively high. So there aren't those easy economic stimulus levers to pull anymore, and interest rates are relatively low. And we're desperate need for economic structural reform. If you read about South Africa at the moment, electricity supply is troublesome, but there's many others too. The railways is virtually closed down. The state-owned part of the economy is not doing particularly well, and it's become something of a drag. So that's where we are. And real property values, when us economists like to talk about real property values, when you adjust for general inflation, peaked. All property capital value, according to MSCI data, was an all-time recorded high by about 2015. And thereafterwards has started to decline in real terms in line with this broader economic stagnation since about a decade ago. And we're about 25% down in real terms, according to MSCI data and capital values. And I do believe we still have some way to go. Now, that's one can see this as, opportunity coming, because I think we're moving towards the next buying opportunity, but that's probably still a few years away. I think what needs to happen before the next big property boom time can possibly come is economic structural reform. And you'll read a lot about, I can't really mention all the structural reforms here, but the government side of the economy has to be, I think, scaled down, privatized, more deregulated, allow the private sector in. There are early signs of that starting to happen as the ruling party comes under pressure with its own popular vote percentage having dropped in the recent local government elections to below 50%. But I think that ultimately what needs to happen for more meaningful structural reform to happen is for different political alignments. So I think government change is important. That's probably a few years away, because the ruling alliance is an old freedom struggle alliance, which is an unlikely grouping of people who used to have a common enemy but don't have it anymore. So it's an outdated ruling alliance, and I think it's a sinking ship at the moment. So we probably some way off, and I think after the next big political change, we could then go into the next big super cycle boom time, but not just yet. So that's I think what we've got to live with for the time being is this sort of longer term super cycle correction phase until such time as we get political change and more meaningful structural economic reforms. Inside the macro trends, there are obviously smaller trends which are important to take note of. Now, that sort of trends within trends. Now, since the 1970s, we've been a rapidly urbanizing country. There's been the closure of a lot of the railways in the rural areas, which used to be big. Farming has not been a long-term growth sector, and a lot of farm subsidies got withdrawn. There were a lot of support measures for the rural areas, which got phased out a few decades ago. And then, of course, the mining sector too is not a long-term growth sector. So certain mining towns too have gone backwards, especially in the area of gold. South Africa is the biggest gold producer of all time, but it's now, that industry is in decline, and it's now the third largest gold producer, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, a lot of rural towns have deteriorated, bar those more Western Cape way, for instance, which have reinvented themselves as tourism destination, getaway destinations, or even what we call semigration destinations. In other words, you're not immigrating out of the country, you're moving away from, say, the great city of Joburg to other parts of the country. We call it semigration in South Africa. So those are these movements within the country are key themes. And a lot of those smaller towns councils where they haven't reinvented themselves as destinations, the municipalities are almost dysfunctional in many cases. And this is another big theme in South Africa at the moment, is increasingly businesses and individuals looking for those parts of the country that work, where councils work, where provincial governments work. And they find a lot of that, the best run councils, in the Western Cape region, but not only the Western Cape region, but that is a big one. And so we've had a very strong semigration of people, affluent people, highly skilled people towards the Western and Southern Cape region of the country. And I think that's key. That semigration rate seems to be cranking up at the moment. And I think that's key in driving superior property performance in the coming years in those parts of the world. Now, back to my part of the country, the great city of Johannesburg, the biggest gold rush town, I think, ever in history. But the problem is for us as well is that the gold has run out. It's a services dominated city now. It's a services hub and it's had great infrastructure, but there has been significant mismanagement. So it's become a less popular city to be in. And obviously as technology develops, it enables more people and businesses to be more decentralized. So we found this sort of migration somewhat to the coast, not only to the Western Cape, but also to the Durban, the East Coast region in what we call KwaZulu-Natal. People that are looking for lifestyle, looking for place to, and I think some business decentralization is starting to happen too. So the industrial property markets, for instance, on the coast are significantly stronger at the moment than in Gauteng province being where Johannesburg and Pretoria are inland. So this migration, this change where Johannesburg is not the be all and end all anymore, and other cities are slowly chipping away at its glory days, is a key theme to property too. And I think big regions wise, the Western and Southern Cape are going to be the outperformers in the near term. Excuse me. So that's it. Those are important themes. Then just to quickly go into the key sectors. The work from home levels are elevated now compared to what they were before lockdowns, although many have filtered back to the offices, but not to the extent of before the lockdowns. Our office vacancy rates, which were already rising before COVID-19 struck, are very high. That's the weakest performing sector of the three commercial sectors. Industrial being the outperformer, retail somewhere in the middle, and office being the weakest. And so the big theme in office space at the moment is a lot of repurposing to residential, often lower cost residential, changing the face of the central business districts and the decentralized nodes. But that I think has got to happen. I don't think we're ever going back to the levels of office attendance that we were prior to COVID-19. So there's a lot of office space hanging around, and someone has to do something with it. Online retail is slower in this part of the world at hitting us as to what it is in, say, the States, for instance. But I do think it is coming. It is growing. So that's a challenge for retailers already affected by a poor consumer because of a stagnant economy. So retail is mediocre. And I think for us in South Africa, your smaller convenience centers focused more on essentials, high frequency essentials such as food and groceries, those are the ones in the pound seats, the neighborhood and community sized shopping center. The bigger ones, what we call regionals and super regionals, which are more destinations, more dependent on entertainment, luxury goods, non-essentials, eating out. Those bigger centers, I think, are challenged more at the moment in the weak consumer environment, and where essentials are king. So that's the retail setup at the moment. Industrial is outperforming, especially coastal industrial, it seems, especially in the warehousing and logistics set part of it, gearing up for greater e-commerce, online retail, probably much the same as in many parts of the world. So industrial is sort of the darling. If you could add a fourth sector to it, tourism has battled back after COVID. Hotel incomes for the country as a whole are still about 30% down on pre-COVID levels, although improving. But the consumer is challenged, or the household sector is challenged. So holidays are on the back burner for many because of financial reasons. Foreigners are coming back, but they're probably not here in as greater numbers as prior to COVID just yet. And I think that what's a more permanent issue for hotels is that we've Zoomified a lot of our economic, our business interactions. So business travel will not go back to the same levels as what it was prior to COVID-19. So the hotel sector, I think, especially the part of it around our cities, which depends heavily on business travel, is challenged for the time being. So that's my sort of key property themes in a nutshell. I think I've probably used up my 12 minutes. Super cycle, stagnation phase, real long-term correction in values. We're moving, I think, towards the next big buying opportunity a few years from now at a sort of a macro level. Within the trends, there's some interesting trends to take note of. Companies and individuals increasingly looking for well-run councils where they exist. I think those are the outperforming property markets to come. A lot of those are in the Western and Southern Cape, and I think that's going to be the outperforming region as a result of that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was very informative. Teresa, are we going to do the questions after Louis Talliard's presentation?
I would suggest after
okay.
Louis' presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, John. So our next speaker is Mr. Louis Talliard. Sorry, I'm trying to open this here. He is, in South Africa, he's an advocate of the Supreme Court of South Africa since 1972, practicing in the Bloemfontein Bar from 1972 to 74, legal advisor to Eskom, which is a very large, the largest electrical supply commission in South Africa, legal advisor to Ster-Kinekor. So besides being the legal voice for so many of the largest entities there, he's also an appraiser for the Master of the High Court in South Africa. So he brings the other perspective on property valuation. Co-author of National Diploma in Valuation at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. So he also teaches. Louis, how do you find all the time, Mr. Talliard, to do all this? But, thank you very much for taking time to be here with us, and it's all yours. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Ahmed. Good day, everybody. Nice to be with you today. Yeah, how do I find the time? I'm seeing property and the property business as a hobby. I don't see it as a work. I think if you see property as a work, it's too tough, you'll leave the industry. If you see it as a hobby, you can talk property 24 hours a day without getting tired because you enjoy what you're doing and you'll be in that field for the rest of your life. In fact, I've never seen an estate agent or a real estate agent going into retirement. A lot of people are moving from other industries into the real estate industry because they are burnt out in their industry. Like in advertising, they often say, when you get to the age of 40, you're burnt out, you must leave the industry. And then those people are moving into another field, and often it could be real estate. The real estate industry is a marvelous industry because we've got a fantastic product we're selling. What is the product we're selling in real estate? Appreciation. We are selling appreciation to our clients. No one will buy unless he believes the property he's buying will go up in value on the long term. If you tell him that he must buy today for R1 million because in 6 months' time the property will be in the market for 600,000, he will be laughing at you. He will not buy, he'll rather rent. So the reason why people buy property or invest in property on the long term is appreciation. Every industry has got a product they're selling. If you are going to the movies and you watch a film, what is the product the movie house is selling you? I call it escapism. You escape from reality to sit in a movie house for 2 hours and forget about your problems. That's their product. If you are buying cosmetics from Revlon, what product are Revlon selling you? Hope. You are hoping to look more beautiful. That's their product. I believe we've got a marvelous product in our industry, and that is that property on long term is appreciating. I, in fact, want to take you back for about 40 years to say what happened in the last 40 years in South Africa. We went through 3 booms during the last 40 years. I can remember the huge recession we were in 1975, 1976 in this country. We had a lot of riots against the apartheid government, the Soweto riots, and there was a negative element in this country. A lot of boycotts against this country. And a lot of developers stopped developing. A lot of developers stopped creating new properties. And the shortage of property started building up towards the end of the 1970s. At the same time, real estate agents was regulated by an act which came out in 1976, the Estate Agents Affairs Act. For the first time, real estate agents had to register to act as real estate agents. Now that old act became outdated, and it was recently, in fact, beginning of this year, replaced with a new act, the Property Practitioners Act. I'll come back to that a bit later, but the early 1980s, a huge shortage of property started building up in South Africa, especially in the residential field. And in 1982, the shortage became so big that the demand for property just went up overnight. And within 1 year, between 1982 and 1983, residential properties went up by 200% in 1 year. That was the very first big boom we encountered in the property industry since estate agents started being regulated and controlled in the property industry. That was a huge boom. But soon after 1983, interest rates started going up. Interest rates even went to 25% for a short time as prime rates towards the end of the 1980s. A lot of boycotts came against South Africa. The apartheid government was forced to make some decisions. And in the early 90s, they decided to unban the ANC. Nelson Mandela was released. And then in 1994, we encountered another boom in the property industry. When the free elections in 1994 took place, we suddenly find that property started booming again, exactly 12 years after 1982. So what we are sitting here with is what I call the property clock, the real estate clock. I made the document available to Teresa only yesterday. Now, a real estate clock is a clock where you, at 12 o'clock, you're at a boom. And at 6 o'clock on that clock, you are in a recession. At 9 o'clock, you are busy moving back to the boom. And at 3 o'clock, you are moving out of a boom into a recession. So that property clock was at 12 o'clock in 1982. And it was again at 12 o'clock after 1994, exactly 12 years later. As John mentioned, interest rates went sky high towards the end of the millennium. A lot of people thought the world is coming to an end. Everyone was told our computers will not work. That's the end of the world. A lot of people packed their bags and were sitting at churches waiting for the end of the world on that night before 2000 started. And suddenly, when nothing happened and the world carried on after 2000 started, slowly and gradually, we started moving again up that property clock from 6 o'clock, we were hitting in 1998, towards 9 o'clock in 2002. I think the clock is now on the screen. So by the time we got to 2004, we were hitting 9 o'clock. A lot of property developers stopped developing. A huge shortage of property started building up. And by 2006, we hit 12 o'clock. And what happened in 2006? Between 2006 and 2008, property values again went doubled and tripled in value over that period. It was such a fantastic time that a lot of developers jumped on the bandwagon to also start with developments. Unfortunately, a lot of developers burned their fingers because they only started when they were seeing how well everyone else was doing. And in 2008, 2009, the property market started going back into a recession. To a certain extent, because of a worldwide recession kicking in at the same time, worldwide. And in 2010, we were back moving past that 3 o'clock point towards 6 o'clock. What it's meaning that if you are in investment of property, you must understand the property clock, because you cannot start with big developments at 3 o'clock. You may sell all your units off plan when you are, before you're even starting to build. But as you now starting to complete your development, you will find that most of your contracts will fall apart, or people will pull out of their contracts because they are not seeing any appreciation of those properties. They are in fact seeing properties going down in value between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Now this recession started in 2008, 2009. It carried on in 2010, 2012. Quite a few other things happened to this country. We had political problems. We had state capturing during that period. We had a huge drought hitting this country during that period. And if my 12-year periods I was talking about was correct, it meant that in 2018, we should have hit another boom. Now, as John explained, a lot of things happened. And because of that, we're still not in that boom. It's now 2022. It is taking a bit longer this time. But all I'm saying is, it may take longer, but there is another boom coming. Because quite interesting, if you look at the last 40 years, every recession is followed by a boom. Unfortunately, every boom is followed by a recession. So the boom is on its way. It is taking longer to come. COVID-19 is also causing another 2-year delay in the process. But if you look at this real estate clock, we're possibly now back to 9 o'clock. You can see it in the market. I'm training real estate agents. I'm training developers at Wits University. I'm seeing the trends, and I'm already picking up that the market is starting to recover at the bottom end of the market. That agents are experiencing a shortage of stock under 1 million rand, or even up to 1.5 million. It's now also becoming scarce up to 2 to 2.5 million, but there's still an oversupply of residential properties over 2.5 million. So the recovery always starts at the bottom and it's building up. So we are going past at 9 o'clock. There are a few things to be put in place. Load shedding is a big problem because we don't have enough power in the country at the moment, but it can be overcome. There's enough new solar and wind farms going up in South Africa that my prediction is within the next 3 to 5 years, our load shedding problem will be solved. If you look at other countries like Vietnam, that's exactly what happened in Vietnam. They had a big power problem in 2017. They started switching over to solar and wind farms, even with the help of South African engineers. So we've got the expertise. And Vietnam has proved to the world that they can get out of that power problem, and they've overcome that power problem. They halve the economy of South Africa, and they've done it. We can also do it. So I believe it's coming. The government is a bit slow to go into the private sector to buy electricity and feed it into the grid. But I think they've got no choice now, because we are sitting with load shedding. Where I'm sitting tonight here, we've got load shedding. I'm running on an inverter. But it will overcome. So what is happening? We are moving back to that boom, but we must also take into account that certain areas are doing better than other areas. John talked about the Western Cape. We talk about KwaZulu-Natal. There are some big developments even in the Gauteng area, the Johannesburg area. There are developers, there are investors who's got faith in some of these areas. Recently, a 55-story building was erected in Sandton, north of Johannesburg, the highest building now in Africa. But quite interesting, it's not an office block, because we know that there's an oversupply of offices. So the Leonardo, this building is called, is not an office block. It's a mixed development. And that's also one of the new trends for development in South Africa, is mixed development. The Leonardo has got apartments at the top. It's got offices in the middle. It's got retail at the bottom. It's got even a school. So you can in fact live there, you can work there, and you can shop there. And you can go out to restaurants at night in that building. You don't need to leave a building for a year. I don't think everyone would like to be like that, but maybe it helps with a high petrol price. So, but that's the new trend in South Africa, is mixed developments. Melrose Arch in Sandton, various other developments, north of Randburg, north of Johannesburg and Randburg, the eco development around the Lanseria airport. These are all new trends in South Africa for the property industry. And it's showing to us that the property in South Africa is busy picking up towards that 9, 10 o'clock point. And the nice thing about the property clock, the moment you go over 9 o'clock, then you not only sit with people purchasing property for own use, then the investor comes into the market. The investor is not buying at 6 o'clock, he's not buying at 3 o'clock, but he moves into the market when you get to 9 o'clock. And between 9 o'clock and possibly 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, investors are very busy competing with people buying for own use. And it will only slow down again at 3 o'clock. So when you are dealing with investors as a real estate agent, you must understand this clock. You must be able to explain this clock to your investors, to your clients. And you must tell them at that point, should they move into the market? When should they invest? When should they pull out of the market? You must also sell the appreciation product to them, the fact that property is appreciating on the long term, meaning that you may only earn 10% from tenants in your property as an investor. So your return from tenants is 10%, but if your appreciation of that property is another 5 or 10% per annum on the long term, it means that your overall return on that property could be between 15 and 20%. And we all know in economics that the moment you can earn 15 to 20% on an investment property, and when you use bond finance as a portion of your payment for that property, and your equity is only 20 or 30 or 40% coming from your side, then gearing or leveraging could set in. That means you are getting 15 or 20% on your investment, but the bank is charging you only 8 or 9% in South Africa at the moment, 8.5% or 8.25% on your bond, meaning that there's gearing taking place. That means the return on your own money is tremendously shooting up, possibly to 50 or 60%. So that's the sought after thing in real estate as investors, to not only earn 15 or 20% by using gearing and finance from the bank at a cheaper price when he earns on his development, he can in fact enhance his return tremendously. And that is one of the reasons why investors are going for investments in this country. So it's, see, I'm running out of time as well. It is recommended that investors must look at South Africa And they must look at certain areas more than other areas, as John said, but there are also other developing areas apart from the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. There are certain developing areas which is busy exploding at the moment in South Africa. We sit with an area in the east of the country next to the Kruger National Park, the Steelpoort Valley, a valley, it's 100 kilometers long. There are 27 platinum mines on the reaches of that valley. That valley will become a city with a few million people staying there in the next 10 years. Because the mines, especially the platinum mines, are in fact playing a huge role in the mining industry. It's important to see areas like that developing. South Africa is controlling platinum in the world. I think we are producing up to 95% of all platinum in the world. So that's one of the areas which will explode. There's another area in the north of South Africa. It's an area called Alice Ras, now with a new name, Lepelale, where the Medupi power station is. That area there is going to explode. There will be a city with a few million people staying in that area within the next 5 to 10 years. There are diamond mines going up there. There are coal mines going up there. There's a lot of other developments in that area. So those are also developing areas which will explode in the next 5 to 10 years. A last one I want to mention is the Saldanha Harbour. On the west coast, about 120 kilometers from Cape Town. The Saldanha Harbour is the deepest natural sea harbour in the world. And it's underdeveloped. I believe that area in the Langebaan lake area running 40 kilometers into the inland from Saldanha will become a huge development hub, which will cause a lot of developers and a lot of investors to move to that area as well. So there are fantastic possibilities in this country, and I believe the country has got a lot to give to any investor from anywhere else in the world. And with a rand at 16 rand to the dollar or 20 rand to the pound, I think you can buy property at a very good price if you look at your conversion, your currency conversion. And that's in a nutshell what I wanted to deal with you tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you. That's excellent points. A lot to think about with both the presentations. But before I hand it over to Alina and with the questions, I'm going to put out a question for either one, both of you can answer. So there's two issues on hand when I'm looking at South Africa. One is we look at the local population, and there's definitely disappointment with what's going on. There seems to be corruption. It's very rife in every sector, especially in the government sector. To try and fight that, obviously, you've got to have people who are willing to stand up, and it's a safety issue. Basically, their lives are at stake. But also then you got the foreign investor. I remember flying from Frankfurt to Johannesburg to Cape Town, and the flight had Germans, the whole flight had German passengers. And I started talking to a few of them, and they own places in the Cape, in Nyasa. And so now, just give me your take. Is the foreign investor or the foreign buyer going to think twice? Or what is the remedy? Where do we go from here?
Shall I go first, Louis?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. On the policy, I mean, I mentioned it's the need for structural reform in this economy for it to really start firing. When you look at Britain in the 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher did a lot of very significant structural reform, the one prerequisite, I believe, I mean, she was a very strong lady, but she couldn't do it by herself. The one prerequisite was that she had a pretty unified ruling party behind her to back her when she took her big fights to the unions and privatized the mines and did all those very ugly decisions, who took all those very ugly decisions and had to face all the disruption of strike action and see that it wasn't her that would blink first. We are not there yet. The ruling alliance of this country, the ANC COSATU Communist Party Alliance, is a broad church that was put together to fight apartheid. It did that successfully, but it was almost like the allies of World War II, where you had Stalin and the Americans sitting around the same table. It only made sense as long as there was a common enemy, and once the common enemy was defeated, that alliance was no more. Now, that's where we are now, that you've got such a broad church of such differing views on any economic policy that it's very difficult to get anything done, good or bad. And I think, so to me, it's important to get we're going into a messy era of coalition politics because, you know, in America, if the Democrats lose the houses, the Republicans take over. It's very obvious. In South Africa, the ruling party is losing support steadily, but there's no obvious government in waiting. We don't have that yet. We've got a very fragmented opposition. So I think it's a process of messy coalition politics at various levels of government. Not much gets done for quite a few years until some new groupings, old groupings break up, new groupings form, and you get new alignments based on modern day political issues, not on old apartheid era issues. And then you can have more unified groupings behind the leader that can probably get things done. So I'm of the firm belief that you need the next big political change first to get to meaningful structural reform. With regards to foreigners, I think South Africa, especially the Western Cape, down the coastal regions, and have been relatively popular. Yeah, I've seen a lot of Germans myself, and many others. I don't think we're, you know, us South Africans do get excited about the number of foreigners in, you know, buying in places like the Western Cape, which is probably more than the rest of the country. But I don't think it's as big a foreign buying as what you possibly see. You see in places like London, for instance, where people don't only come there to retire or live a life of leisure, but come there to work and be employed as well. I think London's much more cosmopolitan. A lot of the big places are big regions of the world than we are. But I do think there's a certain appeal for European, often retirees, is that it is more affordable here. It is a very relatively weak exchange rate. And many of them that I've met, they come here and they live a grand lifestyle, you know, material lifestyle, because of that exchange rate, which they can't often live in those expensive countries of Europe. So there is an opportunity there. And I think a significant amount of them have been taking advantage of that.
Thank you. Teresa, you can take over.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions in the chat. So if anyone has any last questions for our presenters in the chat, go ahead and type them in. I know that someone had asked me prior to this presentation, and what you see this in, especially in countries that Americans don't know a lot about. Typically, throughout the world, they're more worldly in knowing international affairs, whereas Americans maybe are not. But what if they are investing in a property in South Africa, how they can feel assured that there is safety or you know, regular I don't know what the right word is, that laws are in place that they can feel secure if they go to visit their property and or if they're renting their property. What sort of assurances are investors given in that regard?
I think that's for Louis.
Yeah, if I can answer that, there is I think if you look at the big investors already investing in South Africa, I've mentioned that 55-story building built for billions in the area. It's proof that there are investors who has got trust in South Africa. Even Amazon, one of the biggest companies in the world, is now putting up a headquarters for Africa in the Cape. So there are large companies already investing, showing that there's a lot of trust in the future of South Africa. So if you look at the investments going up in KwaZulu-Natal, if you look at north of Durban at the Umhlanga area, I think it's the area with the most overhead cranes in the country at the moment, with all the investment buildings going up there. If you look at all the estates going up, there is no ways that this country will just close down overnight. There's so much investment going into this country that any investor can be rest assured that his investment will be safe in this country. I've got a lot of hope for the next election. John talks about coalition government. I believe coalition government can work very well. If you look at a country like Germany, they work with coalition government and it works well for them. I believe we're in for coalition government. The ANC will possibly be well under 50%, and they will have to pull in a partner, or the opposition will have to look for various partners. The biggest cities in South Africa is already now controlled by the opposition parties, like Johannesburg, Pretoria, now called Swane, Cape Town. It's already controlled by opposition parties with coalition government in place. And it's working very well. I believe this will be the trend for the new election. There's also a new act coming through Parliament right now to change who can stand for Parliament as candidates. They are going to allow individuals to stand for Parliament, not only parties. That will bring a huge change in the political arena. And that could cause a very strong opposition to stand up and take control of the government after 2024.
Thank you very much. So I have one more question, but I did want to remind everyone to put their contact information in the chat, and that we would have a networking session as we close up the Q&A session. One of the questions from the chat is, what does the luxury real estate market look like in South Africa?
John?
I should go. I think that's probably been in this time of lower interest rate cuts, low interest rates after the cuts of our central bank cut quite aggressively in 2000, and the residential market had a relatively strong period. But I would say it was sort of middle market to lower down, where it was stronger, the more credit driven market. The luxury one, tough to single out. You know, I think you have to look more area specific. It's tough to generalize about the luxury market, but you know, I think what people, the affluent are sort of, I guess, to a certain extent, cutting themselves off from the country's issues. I've talked about councils that don't work. I've talked about semigration to places with better lifestyle. And then within Joburg too, you find out north of Johannesburg, you find these sort of luxury estates, Steyn City, you know, sort of enclosed estates where the infrastructure is all privately owned and privately run, and it's, you know, you could be, they can buy the lifestyle that they want because infrastructure elsewhere is sort of in decay a bit. So so I think that those sort of enclave living is becoming more popular, and I call it enclave living for lack of a better word. And so, you know, I think that, you know, going forward, you are going to see certain select luxury markets, the sort of gated communities of northern Johannesburg, and then, you know, along the Western Cape and KZN coast, where there's some certain big lifestyle estates have been developed, I think can be sort of relative outperformers as the wealthy sort of move to places almost to, because you know, when you're in a bit of a rougher and more uncertain period, I think the wealthy, where they can, they move into these secure estates where they can sort of, you know, cut themselves off from the risks of, because it does get quite volatile here. I mean, that's the reality. I think when political change comes to South Africa, it does get volatile. Added to that, at the moment, you've got global inflation surge. food price, petrol price inflation, that's causing worldwide unrest, and I don't think we'll escape that sort of socioeconomic instability either. So I think it's possible that some of the sort of the luxury enclaves could become relative outperformers. But during the last few years, on average, my sense and the numbers we've sort of seen is that that more luxury market hasn't been the outperformer. It's been lower down in the residential markets.
Okay. Did you have anything to add, Louis?
Yeah, but I think the market is recovering. You can see a huge recovery in the market, and you can see that even luxury apartments are starting to sell much better. Quite interesting. The market up to 2 million in residential are selling well because you can get finance from the banks. And when over 2 million, the banks are more difficult to grant finance. And when you get to a point where you go to 3 or 4 million, when the banks is not involved, because when we are talking about cash buyers. So there's a lot of cash buyers at the top end of the market buying into luxury apartments. I mean, the Leonardo in Sandton, if you look at one of those top units, you talk about a 75 million rand unit. In the Cape at the waterfront, there are units selling for over 100 million. So there's a lot of these luxury markets where, in fact, there's no bond finance involved, where people are cash buyers, often people from overseas. And that market is still going, and it will forever go so long these areas are areas people are looking for.
Thank you very much. So we have 2 more questions, and if we can kind of respond in like less than a minute on each, and then we will move on to the networking portion. And then if people have additional questions, they can take it offline and connect with them via LinkedIn or any other way they see fit. So one of the next 2 questions, I'll just ask them both, and then you can decide what you want to respond to first, is how much crypto and blockchain is being used in the real estate industry there. And then this is a more specialized question, but can talk to the investment potential. They were talking about that they have a client that they're looking to invest in the US, but why would they not invest in Africa if the return on investment is good? He is in the gold mining industry. However, you mentioned the decline in that industry. Would that perhaps be a factor?
John?
Louis, you're the youngster. You talk about crypto and blockchain. I'm a dinosaur. I don't get the impression we're big on crypto and blockchain stuff yet. But I don't know, Louis, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's playing a role in the property industry yet, because there's no control. If you look at the cryptocurrencies, it can be at 50,000 and it can drop to 10,000 overnight. So there's no control. There's no bank behind it. We're not coming across that type of method of payment for real estate at the moment in South Africa.
All right. And about the investment potential?
So can you just repeat that question again, that second question?
Yes, they have a client from Ghana interested in investing in the US. Why would he not opt to invest in Africa if the return on investment is good? He is in the gold mining industry. However, you mentioned the decline in the industry. Is that perhaps a factor?
I suppose one thing is if you're on the African continent, if you're in Ghana already and you may have property interests already, then a lot of people in this continent like to diversify into developed countries. I suppose much the same as the diversifying geographically is quite popular. I don't think you can get away from the reality too that we're a higher return continent, but a higher risk continent too. The higher risk, higher return, higher risk, higher loss, depends which way you want to look at the coin. One chap, for those of you who might have heard of an area called Hillbrow in Johannesburg, a very high density residential area, which went into serious decay as the Joburg Central CBD sort of, I wouldn't say imploded, but went into bad decay bad decline in the 80s and the 90s. And Hillbrow, you could almost, not, there were hijacked buildings and all sorts of issues with the place. But, for those hardcore landlords who knew how to manage those buildings in those rough areas and knew how to manage tenants and building hijackers, those things were printing money. 25. One guy mentioned a net yield to me of 25%. Those were the type of things. So, amazing returns, but it didn't come without serious risks. You had to know what you were doing. So, I suppose it's a risk return type of thing. South Africa is a higher risk country than many developed countries. Will give you higher return in the process.
If I can come in on that.
Sure.
Yes. If you look at the inner cities at the moment in South Africa, a lot of those buildings in the inner cities are now belonging to the municipality because it was purchased at execution sales because the owners just ran away when the buildings were hijacked by squatters. In the Joburg area alone, we sit with about 500 of these high-rise buildings in the inner city. And lately, the municipalities like Johannesburg is now starting to give these buildings to entrepreneurs who can come up with business plans to refurbish these buildings. So you are getting the building for free on a 99-year leasehold, and you can now refurbish your building and turn the old office block into residential apartments to house workers from the inner city, so they don't need to travel long distances to get to work from the east and the west to the middle of Johannesburg. Together with that, the Income Tax Act, Section 13 Quad, that's the Fourth Amendment of the Income Tax Act, is also giving you a huge incentive by allowing you to deduct your refurbishment cost of such an old building at 20% a year over a 5-year period. So you can deduct 100% from your taxable income after you've done the refurbishment. That's a huge incentive why investors should look at the inner cities. And the reason why your local authorities are doing it is because they want to better the inner cities. They want to change the inner cities and turn them back to world-class cities, and not like it is at the moment with a lot of hijacked buildings in the cities. And it is working to a great extent in the Joburg area. If you go to Joburg and you go to west of Elof Street, you already see quite a nice area where there are nicely refurbished buildings and the pavements are clean and you can park there safely, and there are the little parks and the hawkers are in demarcated areas. If you go east of Elof Street, it's still a mess. So they are working on it, and I think they are getting somewhere. They are planning to get the Gau train to be built from the airport right into the middle of Johannesburg, from Lanseria Airport and OR Tambo and Soweto and Randburg and a few areas in Gauteng. But the result is that they are seeing in 5 to 10 years time from now that visitors to this country can get off at the airport, get into the Gau train, and they can travel to the middle of Johannesburg and stay in boutique hotels and safely walk the streets of an inner city, which is nicely refurbished and done up, so that you are closer to what you find in New York and other big cities in the world. I think they're working on it at the moment, and these tax incentives are one of the attractions for any investor as well.
Thank you very much. And thank you both for presenting today. This is valuable information. I think for a lot of people, they don't have a lot of exposure to African countries, and it's good for them to have a different perspective, as there's many countries in Africa, but yet we're often not educated in the different economies and real estate. And so this is a really great opportunity for people to learn more about both Africa and South Africa. And going forward, if anyone would like more information, feel free to contact me and I can help guide you to the right direction. This session is recorded, so it will be on our NICAR Commercial Global Business Network site, as well as putting it on YouTube. I did ask everyone to put their contact information in the chat. You can feel free to download that, but if for some reason you are having issues or whatever, you can also contact me with that. I'm at info@teresamueller.com, and I'm happy to send that to you, as well as the clock or anything else that you might have interest in. And then going forward, would love to hear from the audience, any kind of feedback that was helpful to you. If you have suggestions for future seminars, we're all ears. I appreciate everyone's time today. We are going to move on to the networking session and end this recording. Thank you for coming to NICAR's CGBN webinar, and look forward to seeing you next month, hopefully at C5. Thank you.